I'm Nolan Hout here. I'm the head of marketing at Infopro Learning, and we've got Dan with us, who will do his introduction himself as well. Again, this is the webinar on the future of leadership development. We really appreciate you joining. We'll keep the housekeeping short. First question we always get asked, will we send you the recording? Absolutely. Usually takes us a day or two just to create the recording and make it clean and make sure it doesn't start with 8 minutes of Dan and I trying to figure out which screen he's showing. But as soon as we get that chopped out, we'll make sure that we share this with everybody here. That will be given to you. GoToWebinar has questions is the best way to communicate. Feel free to use that as a chat to me or ask questions. The way that we're going to do this webinar in particular is ask questions along the way throughout the whole thing. I'll try to stop Dan intermittently throughout if we see a couple questions along the same lines, but then we'll also have a little bit of time at the end as well. So feel free to utilize that question pane to your heart's content. And a little bit about Infopro Learning, who's the company, and then we'll get started. Been in business for over about 3 decades, I guess, now. There's a bunch you can read on this slide if you would like to. I think maybe the most easiest way to describe, we're a full service learning and development company. So today we're here talking with you about leadership. That's one of our core offerings. We're also very well known in our managed learning space, content development, talent, training delivery, really working with larger organizations on any type of solution that they might have to help unlock the performance of their employees. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan in the sales pitch on my side. I'm going to turn my camera off as well to give Dan the full attention. And again, utilize those questions. We will send you the recording at the end within a day or two as well. Thanks. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Nolan. Nolan has promised me that if you send any questions or comments to him, he'll repeat them verbatim. The one thing that that's going to be uncomfortable with this next 50 minutes is I'm used to a lot of interactivity, particularly with this topic, and we're just because of the number of people that we have in the webinar, we've got the audio shut down for the participants. So it is going to be essentially one way, unless you do make comments or ask questions via the chat or the questions function, and then we'll absolutely be responsive to those. So I'd like to start with, very briefly, I am the head of the leadership development practice for Infopro Learning. My work is in engaging with client organizations every single day, talking about their leadership development needs, what's working, what's not working, and ultimately helping to craft solutions for them, either from our off-the-shelf programs or from custom programs that we develop for them. And I'll go into a little more detail about my background a little bit later in the presentation, but I wanted to start with a 20-year trend line. For the last 20 years, I've been deploying an employee engagement survey and tracking the results year by year. We've kept the questions very consistent, although over the years we've expanded on a few of the questions, but we've kept them consistent so that we can in fact get a trend line. And some interesting things have resulted from looking at the 20-year trends. Number one, the trend line related to general employee uncertainty, insecurity about their job, about their work environment. You can see the trend line here. There's definitely a trend upwards in employee uncertainty. There's also, if you look at the trend line regarding employee cynicism, and again, a big trend line upwards in employee cynicism. And when I look at the actual employee comments related to this year by year, it's interesting trying to discern what the root causes of this might be. And I have some thoughts, but I don't necessarily know absolutely for certain what's driving uncertainty or cynicism. But from the comments that employees have shared from the surveys, the work environment that many of them have experienced or are experiencing is driving a fair amount of cynicism. Oftentimes, they speak about a disconnect between what their leaders are telling them and what the leaders are actually doing, what their companies are telling them and what their companies are actually doing. A lot of comments from employees who talk about what they were told in the interviewing process and what they were expecting because of the interview process, and then what they actually experienced on the job, both in the organization and the actual job itself. And my goal isn't necessarily to go into great detail on any one of these, but you can see there's a trend line in terms of employee perspectives regarding ethical leadership. And that trend line is definitely downward. And then the authentic leadership is an absolute almost straight line downward over the last 20 years. And normally, if we were in a workshop or some other live environment, we would discuss this because I've had many, many, many conversations with leaders about the results of these surveys and their point of view, their perspective on what's driving employee cynicism, what's driving uncertainty. Why are employees perceiving their leaders as being less authentic, less ethical than ever before? And it's probably not rocket science when you look at um, the leaders of our society, the leaders of our culture, the leaders of many of our businesses. We hear a lot more stories about leaders who are ethically challenged than we hear about, great authentic leaders. But my point is simply that if we're going to talk about the future of leadership development, we do have to factor in what is really happening in the world of our employees and what's happening within the mindset of our employees. And particularly in the last 2 years, our employees have been experiencing wave after wave of change. And these waves, we of course have the public health crisis wave related to the COVID pandemic, but it goes beyond that. There is a crisis of kidney failure. I mean, kidney disease is on the rise, liver disease is on the rise, depression is on the rise. Um, uh, Autism is on the rise. There are a number of public health crises that have hit us wave after wave after wave. And of course, the big kahuna is the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's had a pretty significant impact on the overall mindset of both ourselves and our employees. There's a social crisis, this huge wave of uncertainty related to racial inequality, related to gender uncertainty, related to all of the social issues, related to this intensity around cancel culture. There's such a brittleness to our social fabric right now. Again, it may not be what we focus on day in and day out in our work environment, but it's there within the mindset of our employees. There's an economic crisis. Economic uncertainty, income uncertainty, or insecurity, income disparity. Again, whether it's real or perceived, my point isn't to debate what's real regarding the income disparity. We know there's a huge perception amongst our employees and the public in general regarding income disparity. You've got inescapable technology, and to a large degree, that can be positive, but it also has huge negative impacts where technology is impacting every single element of our employees' lives, and sometimes to their detriment. We have environmental crises, not just global warming. Again, my goal isn't to debate the validity of global warming, but it is the global change crisis is embedded in the mindset of many of our employees. But it's not simply uh, climate change. There's also the issue of plastics in the ocean. There are a wide range of environmental uncertainties that are impacting our employees. And then finally, when you think about just the general cultural crisis that we are experiencing right now, you're probably experiencing this. I know I'm perceiving it. There's a brittleness to our culture. It almost seems like you have to pick a tribe, and then whatever tribe you pick, you defend that tribe until the very end. It's very much a we they culture right now, And that cultural crisis does have an impact. And it's being driven by everything from our politics to social media to a variety of other issues that we're not going to go into today. But I do think we have to consider all of these waves of uncertainty that are hitting our employees, wave after wave after wave. And it isn't just a single time. The reason I like the metaphor of the wave is because waves keep coming. This is what hits our employees virtually every single day. And then as I was going through this presentation last night to prepare, and really, you can't talk about waves of crises without also just talking about war. Now all of a sudden we come to realize we're in a world where war still happens. It still can happen, and you have to ask yourself, what does that mean about global leadership? What does that mean about how our world in general is being led when the leaders can't prevent things like this from happening? And so, again, my goal isn't to spend too much time talking about the war in Ukraine, but in fact, this does have an impact on the mindset, particularly of our younger employees, because this is the world they experience. They don't have 30 or 40 years of perspective. But what really, I think, strikes me is at the very same time that we're seeing this, if we go to our social media, our YouTube channels, our TikToks, we're also seeing this. We're seeing 18-year-olds driving Bugattis. There's just something, I'm just going to say, a little strange about our cultural environment right now. Some of it is a bit disconnected from reality, and it does impact the mindsets of our employees. So as we think about the future of leadership, we have to first think about the future of our employees. What are they asking for? What are they focusing on? And it may not always be what we wish they would focus on, but I can tell you from numerous surveys and individual conversations with employees, I am tapped into a number of social channels and social environments where I connect with a lot of younger employees, and I'm spending a lot of time asking questions and listening, just trying to gauge what's going on with them, what's happening, what's shifting, what's changing. And so I'm going to just briefly talk through, from my point of view, from what I'm experiencing, what I think employees are wanting right now. And one of the big things they talk about is rethinking the structure of work. Why do we have a 5-day work week? Why do we have a 40-hour work week? When we shift employees from the office back to their homes, and then we want to shift them from their homes back into the office, in many ways, the remote or hybrid shift in work for many organizations has caused both employees and leaders to rethink, how should we really be structured? And employees don't want to simply be structured because that's the way we've always done it. There is a whole rethinking of how should we be structuring our work. They're also focused on values alignment. And of course, we have all always, preferred to work for an organization that's in alignment with our values. For over 30 years, I would prefer to work with an employer who's in alignment with what I care about most. But for a lot of us, that was a preference, not exactly a requirement. Whereas, particularly for younger employees today, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is it's non-negotiable. They want to work for an organization that they feel aligns with their values at the deepest possible level. And if they come to realize that's not the case, they move on. We talk about the great resignation or the great transition. Some of that is being driven by employees simply deciding, you don't reflect my values for a variety of reasons, and I'm going to find other options. I'm going to move on. Employees are looking for real growth opportunities. They aren't simply looking to learn new skills. They want those skills to be translated into actual growth opportunities for them. And there's an expectation that their employer and their direct supervisor or leader will help them with those growth opportunities, will guide them with those growth opportunities. They're asking for a fair work reward contract. And what's different today is they're much more vocal and much more willing to step forward and virtually demand what they perceive to be fair. Now, fairness, of course, is a perception, and most employers would say that they are rewarding their employees at a fair level. But it's an element that employees are more and more comfortable bringing to the forefront, having conversations with, demanding what they feel is fair. And these can be challenging conversations, but if we're going to talk about what's on employees' minds, this is one thing that's on their minds. They're also rejecting menial or mundane work, any work that just isn't viewed as important or is viewed as, a robot can do this. This could be done more quickly by a machine, or anything that just feels mundane or repetitive. Even the youngest employees, in their very early career stage, are just rejecting or pushing back against doing menial or mundane work. The challenge, of course, for us is that there's still plenty of menial and mundane work that ultimately needs to be done. They're looking for work-life balance, or what I'm now calling life-work balance, because for many employees, and not just younger employees, but for many of the individuals that I talked to, they're emphasizing life first and work second. Now, at the same time that they're emphasizing life first and work second, they still are demanding, fair compensation. They still want their growth opportunities. They still want all the things that they want. And at the same time, they want to focus on well-being and mental health. Much more comfort bringing that to the forefront of a conversation, much more comfort with talking to their direct supervisor, with talking to their organization about whatever mental health issues they might be having and about their general sense of well-being, and much more comfort simply saying, I need to take a mental health day. I need to take a break. I need a break from whatever I need a break from. There's a great deal of comfort in having those conversations, which to a large degree I think is positive. If employees are experiencing mental health issues or other well-being related challenges, you want them to feel comfortable having those conversations, as opposed to, I think, 10, 20, 30 years ago, those might have been things that people would have experienced and would have just tried to figure out ways to handle it on their own without necessarily exposing their employer to the reality of what they're really going through. So on some level, it's a positive, but it also creates challenges for us in the workplace. And the final point I just wanted to make here is that employees are also expecting empathy from their leaders. They expect leaders to align with what's important to them and align with their priorities and align with their, what's critical in their lives. They're expecting that empathy, and if they don't get it, and if it doesn't feel real, they certainly are quick to look at other options and to move on. Now, here's a point, because we're doing this via webinar. I have this conversation regularly with leaders, and this particular slide, we end up having lots of dialogue about the drivers of these factors. What's really not debatable is that these are the things that employees are thinking about. These are their priorities. What, of course, is discussable and debatable is what is driving that and what do we do about it. And so as we transition into what leaders need to do about this, I think it's important to acknowledge that I come to this with a certain point of view. Yeah, we all have our own particular leadership point of view. So I just wanted to briefly acknowledge my leadership point of view and where my leadership point of view began. And so what you see on the screen here is actually me and my scout troop at the tender age of, I think I was 14. If you're trying to figure out where I am in the picture, that's me. And I think the reason we all look a little tired and crabby, this was after 3 weeks of very hard wilderness camping. But this was the beginning of my immersion in what great leadership is. And the great thing for me about the scouting experience is there's a huge focus on leadership development within the scouting organization. And then uh, early in my career, I was an engineer on a fast attack submarine. And again, the military does a lot to embed leadership principles within a person. After I transitioned out of the military, I've had a corporate career in leadership development and learning and development, and developed a very practical, I guess, approach to training and development and to leadership development. Because as an internal corporate practitioner, you have to eat your own dog food, so to speak. You have to live with what you develop, and so you're looking at the results that are produced day in and day out. And then I wrote a book called Workplace Poker that was published by HarperCollins a few years ago. And the great thing about that book is it opened the door to a lot of conversations with employees about what they were experiencing in their corporate life. So day in and day out, I feel like I'm tapped in to the pulse of the employee experience in a wide variety of organizations. And then finally, I have developed and delivered leadership development workshops for Saudi Aramco and KNPC. I've done a fair amount of work in that part of the country. And it has really brought, or that part of the globe, but it's really brought me to a point where I do have a point of view when it comes to the responsibilities of a leader. And the core responsibility, I believe, of a leader is to manage the culture, the environment of the employees that are reporting to that leader. Whether you're leading a team of 3 people or 300,000 people, responsibility number one of a leader is that in the environment within which those employees are working, ensuring that it's an environment that fully unlocks employee engagement. So whether you call it environment, whether you call it culture, this is our model for employee engagement, and it's the basis of one of the training programs or leadership development programs that we actually offer. And we're going to dig into this model here in just a moment. But so the point of view I come from is culture consumes strategy. With apologies to Peter Drucker, I think his phrase was culture eats strategy for breakfast. My way of phrasing that is culture consumes strategy. And if you consume something, one of two things happens. When culture consumes strategy, either strategy becomes part of a culture, it becomes embedded, or the other thing that happens when something is consumed is what's the polite term? It gets evacuated. So depending upon how well strategy is aligned with culture, that determines what happens when culture consumes strategy. So with that as sort of a baseline point of view, let's focus in on, well, what do leaders need to do to respond to this new world of the employee, or these things that are going on with the mindset of our employees? And the first is cultivate engagement. And what's interesting about this, and to me revealing, is that there is no secret here. If you ask employees, which we have done for 20 years, if you ask employees, what does it take to fully engage you on the job? It's no secret. They tell us. The challenge is that what they tell us is increasingly complex. Their employees are expecting more than in the past. So you could probably get a fully engaged employee in the 40s if you just paid them well. You could probably get a fully engaged employee in the 50s and 60s if you paid them well and offered some benefits. What it takes today to gain full engagement of our employees, it takes an awful lot more. And I did have a leader say to me within the last couple of weeks, maybe what the world needs is another really good recession so that our employees aren't as confident as they appear to be now that they will have other employment options. I'm in no way aligning with that point of view. I just found it fascinating that that particular leader's response was basically, I'd really like to go back to those days where, because I offered fair pay for fair work, that was enough to get people fully engaged. So in a few minutes, we'll talk more. We'll kind of unpack engagement in just a bit. What I think leaders also need to learn is to nurture psychological safety for their employees. With so much employee uncertainty and anxiety and cynicism, nurturing psychological safety with our employees it's not necessarily something that leaders are used to doing, but it is absolutely critical if we are going to uh, fully engage our workforce and ultimately retain our workforce. The challenge with nurturing psychological safety is that you first have to answer the question, is it in fact safe? There's no point in creating a sense of safety if in fact it's not safe. So when employees come to you with issues or challenges or complaints, when you have an employee whose performance is suddenly below par, are employees safe? And in some organizations, if we're going to be frank with each other, in some organizations they are not. In some organizations, employees are essentially cogs in the system, tools in the system, and if an employee is suddenly less than optimal or subpar in their performance, we unplug them, we pull them out, and we find someone to replace them. And we may not even recognize how we are negatively impacting the sense of psychological safety for employees. Or an employee comes to us with a perspective or an issue or a challenge, how we handle those challenges, in addition to solving the problem itself, whatever that might be, how we address those is going to have an impact on the degree to which employees feel psychological safety. And if they don't feel it with us, with their actual leaders and their organization, they will eventually gravitate to areas where they do feel psychological safety. It's important more so than ever for leaders to foster inclusion and transparency. And employees don't want to feel like they're simply working blindly as a cog in the system. Whether it's fair or not, reasonable or not, almost doesn't matter. Employees want a sense of transparency and also a sense that they're an important part of the overall system within which they're working. I was speaking to a courier driver a couple of weeks ago and I had an opportunity just to have a 20-minute conversation with him. And I was asking him about the company that he worked for. And what was really fascinating for me was he was clearly very proud of the company that he worked for. And it's a local courier company, not one of the big national courier companies. And well, the first thing that he told me when I just asked him to tell me about the organization was that he said, we're a driver-centered business because our owner was a driver. All of the people in the corporate office were drivers at one time. And the whole business is built around respecting the driver. And when you go to the list on the left-hand side, talk about values alignment. This courier felt proud to work for the company that he worked for and really felt that they were aligned with his values, that he was critical and important to them. But the reason I bring it up now is because he also talked about transparency, the way that particular courier business runs their business. He said in our break room, when we do come in to pick up supplies or hang out in this driver's break room, there are a couple of whiteboards where all of the business metrics are kept up to date. So he said we can see how many deliveries are being made every single day. We can see the revenue that's resulting from those deliveries. We can see the percentage of that revenue that is paid to the drivers because it's always 50% of whatever revenue comes in. But then we can see the other areas where that revenue is being spent as well. He said, really, if you have the financial acumen, you can see the full financial picture of the entire business on those whiteboards, and it's updated every single day. And for him, that sense of transparency in the business was incredibly important. And while not every business can do exactly that, I think it does reveal something that resonates with employees today, a sense of knowing what's happening and not just feeling like you're working blind, so to speak. And when it comes to inclusion, both racial inclusion, diversity inclusion, but also just inclusion in a general sense, helping our employees feel like they are part of the business, not just working for the business. it's increasingly important for leaders to develop the skills and the mindset necessary to do that. When it comes to emerging leaders, I think organizations have always, to some degree, mentored, coached, encouraged their emerging leaders, but it's increasingly on the minds of early um, early stage leaders. I find many of them asking for more, wanting mentoring, wanting coaching, feeling like while their company does a little bit, it doesn't do enough. So the expectation of the amount of mentoring and coaching an emerging leader will get, the expectation is definitely on the rise. And if an employee doesn't feel like they're getting that level of expected mentoring, again, they will probably look for other opportunities. I don't have a better way to say this, but I do think that leaders going forward into the future just need to learn or develop the skills or capacity to think better. Some of us are great critical thinkers. Some of us are great systems thinkers. Some of us are great strategic thinkers or creative thinkers. Going forward into the future, my perspective is that leaders need to think about their thinking more and get better at all of those things and develop the ability to integrate critical, system, strategic, creative thinking in a way that helps them become more discerning, in a way that helps them drive better decisions, have better judgments. Um, the leaders we've been in the past, the thinking we've been able to accomplish in the past probably isn't going to be adequate to produce the same or better results as we go forward into the future. The future is going to be more complex. The future is going to require deeper, better thought. And it's also probably critical for many leaders, especially those who are responsible for driving the growth of their businesses, to find new creative ways to hack growth. The path to growth in our businesses is not going to be the same as the path to growth in the last 20 years for most, or let's say for many businesses. And it's important to be aware of what you are doing right now that is simply a legacy. You're simply doing it the way you're doing it because that's the way that you've done it, or because that's what's produced results in the past. I think we're going to see many businesses struggle where they push harder and harder because they're basically doing the same thing they've always done. And because it's not producing the same results for them, they push forward harder and harder without stepping back to rethink their overall growth approach. So finding ways to hack growth, I think, is going to be critical for many leaders. And it does then require a shift in your thinking as well. So with all of this, oftentimes, again, when I get into conversations about these topics, this is the point at which some leaders will throw up their hands and just say, really? So I'm expected to do all of this. I just don't know that it's, humanly possible. But in fact, probably what it reveals is that we need as leaders to get better at managing our own stress levels, our own energy levels. Certainly there are leaders today who are doing all of these things and they're doing it effectively, they're doing it well. So I do think an area where we can help leaders become more effective is helping them manage stress level, helping them manage their energy level. And it doesn't come automatically. We don't, oftentimes we know what we should be doing to manage our energy, but we end up not doing the things that we should be doing. So helping leaders explore that further and crack their own code when it comes to stress and energy management, I think that is one area where we can help leaders today be better prepared for tomorrow. And then finally, just the general area of optimizing a leader's emotional intelligence, or what I like to call emotional effectiveness, basically helping them in a very practical way apply their EQ in the workplace. It's going to become more and more critical as our future progresses. So with all of that in mind, I mean, to me, this is the point where, again, I would normally have a deep dialogue with the leaders as we're having these conversations. And I did, as I thought this through, we are going to give you an opportunity in a week from now, if you want to be part of a less formal group, just having these conversations, engaging very informally, sharing your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own approaches, what's working for you, what's not working for you. Absolutely, open to that, and we're going to provide you with an opportunity for that informal dialogue. If you just let us know that you are interested in that, and we'll give you more details coming up. Obviously, let me back up for a second. What you see on the right-hand side of the screen, as the head of a leadership development practice, this is what informs our thinking as we develop our courses. So with Infopro Learning, we have a broad library of off-the-shelf courses, and what you see in the center of the screen are the courses that have been developed most recently, the courses that we're getting the most traction with our clients, and these are the courses that most fully reflect what you just saw on the previous screen. And obviously, if you're interested in more information on any of these courses, you can follow up with us, and we will most likely follow up with you and provide you those details. But let's talk about, since engagement is so critical and so challenging in today's environment, I thought it would make sense to kind of open up this particular course and sample some of the content from this course called Cracking the Engagement Code, because I think we can share content that gives you real value that you can take away with you today. So, as I referenced before, this is our employee engagement model. It is research-based. It is based upon 20 years of gathering information on employee engagement, asking employees questions, getting their responses, analyzing both their anecdotal responses and their survey responses. And you can read what's on the screen, so I'm not going to read through each of these, but I'm going to unpack a couple of these items very briefly just to give you some food for thought. So I thought a good place to start would be first, pervasive productivity. What we mean by pervasive productivity is that productivity in an organization or in a work group is equally shared. That we don't have some people carrying more than their fair share of the burden and other people carrying less than their fair share of the burden. And I think what sometimes happens is we drift into situations where we have an employee who is perhaps less than optimal in a particular role. And initially we find informal ways to work around that particular aspect or element. And when you have an employee who's been with you 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and so you've worked around, you've developed informal workarounds in those areas where she's not particularly effective. Over time, that can become more and more extreme. So a couple of questions I have is, have you or others within your work group or within your organization, have you developed informal workarounds to accommodate suboptimal employees? When you look at what should be the formal responsibilities of an employee, and you look at how the expectations for them in their role have perhaps evolved to accommodate areas where they're less than optimal. Now, I'm not saying that if an employee isn't perfect, you should simply let them go. What I am saying is we should at least make conscious decisions about how we adjust the work requirements to the employee's competencies. So if you ask yourself, have you developed informal workarounds to accommodate some suboptimal employees, or do you have some employees who simply, sometimes it's directly, oftentimes it's just indirectly, by just not being available to do the extra work, or not being available to do the more work, or in some cases just with their attitudes, like, hey, you don't want to go to him and ask him about doing a little more of X, whatever that might be. So we tend to go to the people who are willing. We tend to go to the people who are ready to go or willing to help. And in some cases, the tight labor market may have forced us to adjust our standards or lower our standards. And I understand that it does certainly happen. But probably the most important question is, how does this impact your most productive and engaged employees? And I've heard many stories from highly productive employees who will tell me that one of the key annoyances in their workplace is that they are always the go-to person. When someone wants extra work done, or when someone needs something to be handled it comes to them, whereas there are others who have capacity who could be doing it, but people know, well, if they go to another person, either the quality of the work or the timeliness of the work won't be what they need. So we tend to put more and more and more on the shoulders of our more productive and engaged employees. And I understand the nature of that, understand that that does happen, but I think we have to ask ourselves the questions: if it goes too far, is it having a negative impact on those very productive and engaged employees? Because it is one of the key drivers of disengagement for those productive employees. It can be one of the key reasons why employees make a choice to move on if they feel like you're still hanging on. I had a leader who said, a leader of a printing company, and he had one particular employee who was absolutely suboptimal, who and this is a printing plant. So this particular employee, he occasionally made mistakes that forced them to do like repeat print runs. Sometimes things came in late. Sometimes things weren't done the way they needed to be done. But the leader said to me, well, he's willing to work for about $15,000 less each year. If I were to replace him, I'd immediately be paying at least 15,000, possibly 20,000 a year more. So this leader had made a conscious decision to have a suboptimal employee because it was quote unquote saving him. And even when we laid out the actual costs of this suboptimal employee, still was not comfortable making the hard call until he interviewed some of his most productive employees and came to understand how it was impacting them and their attitude toward the business. And he came close to losing one of his best employees because that employee just didn't want to hang around a business that was willing to keep this less than optimal person on. So, not to belabor the point, but pervasive productivity, a sense that everyone is sharing the workload, everyone is equally committed to productivity and quality. It's an important element to an overall culture of employee engagement.
Speaking of belaboring the point, Dan, we're at 12 minutes left. Since we started late, just wanted to give you a time check. We've got 12 minutes left.
I appreciate that. So let's unpack authentic leadership just a bit. So what are employees looking for? If we're going to drive engagement, what are they looking for in terms of authentic leadership? Well, one of the kind of tough lessons that I think can help leaders is to help them understand what employees are noticing about them. As a leader, the further you move up the leadership hierarchy, there tends to be a bubble around you where you don't always get the negative feedback. You don't always get the constructive feedback that perhaps you used to get when you didn't have any power or influence over employees or an organization. So as that bubble grows, oftentimes employees notice things about leaders that they don't ever express, they don't ever let you know. But the truth is, as a leader, employees are noticing all kinds of micro behaviors on your part. They notice your work habits. If you're one of those leaders who consistently shows up late, if you're a leader who has to be reminded regarding details of projects, whatever your work habits might be, if you have some, let's just say, less than optimal work habits, they probably are being noticed by your employees without necessarily anything ever being said to you about it. They notice your work schedule. They notice your attention to detail. They also notice your abilities and knowledge. So if you have some areas where your knowledge is perhaps, I'll say, lacking or isn't as much as it should be or needs to be, it's rare that any of your employees is going to say to you, hey, you probably should really brush up on XYZ, whatever that is. But if there are gaps in your skills or knowledge related to the business, those gaps are noticed. They notice your responsiveness. If when employees send emails that need a response and consistently it takes 2, 3, 4 days to get a response back from you, again, those things get noticed. They notice your mood. They notice your conversations. They notice who you like and respect. When you're on web calls like this, if everybody is sharing their screen or somebody makes a comment or makes a joke, they notice who you laugh at, who you don't laugh at. They notice who you avoid. They notice who you spend time with. They notice your humor or your lack of humor. Leaders are under the microscope all the time. Is it fair? Probably not, but it is the job. It's part of the job. So it is important that leaders understand there is a certain amount of showmanship to every leadership role. And you just have to get comfortable with it because it is a fact. So if you start to look at yourself through the eyes of others and start to think about your work habits, your work patterns, honestly, if you have a couple of peers or a peer, or perhaps even a subordinate who you think might be very comfortable engaging with you and sharing real information with you, it might not hurt to ask questions occasionally regarding, hey, how am I doing? How are things going? Is there anything I can do better or differently? And then pay very careful attention to whatever they might share with you that's constructive, because most likely they're going to be careful. So anything that they share with you that might be considered constructive, they're going to be cautious, and so pay close attention to what it is that they're sharing. And so when employees are looking for authentic leadership, what that means to them is, I want to know that the person I'm working with, working for, is real, is authentic. They don't say one thing here and then say another thing there. They don't act one way here and act another way there. They don't express a certain set of values, but in fact act in a different way that's not in alignment with those values. Or they don't expect us to work 60 hours a week and to be available anytime to jump as high as necessary, while they in fact don't set the same pace in their own work habits, their own work patterns. So, not always fair, but I think it is important to take a moment and think about ourselves through the eyes of others. And so, developing a culture and an environment where employees are highly engaged. The 10 elements here, these are not Dan Rust's elements. These are elements that actually sprang from the surveys and the research that we've done over the last 20 years. And I'm not going to unpack any more of them, but they're all part of, as I said, the program we call Cracking the Engagement Code, where we unpack every single one of these. We share best practices related to every single one of these. And I'm happy to share more information with you. If you reach out and ask for more details, we can certainly do that. We also have a series of programs that are designed truly to help leaders become more inclusive, help employees be more effective in this new workplace where we've got multiple generations, multiple cultures, where trust is oftentimes at risk in the workplace. I think the overall topic of trust is one that I hear about consistently from many employees, where they basically, when we talk about employee cynicism, if you go back to that original screen with that trend where employee cynicism is on the rise, there was a time when you would go to work for a company and you would start from a position of trust. I'm hired. I'm excited. I'm gonna start my job, and because I chose them and they chose me, I'm going to start with trust until proven otherwise. I think it's shifted in today's work environment. Employees start with a layer of cynicism, and if we can call it distrust, maybe it's not quite distrust, but it is a layer of cynicism, and they're waiting for us to prove that we can be trusted. Again, is that fair? No. Is it right? Maybe not, but it is the way it is with many employees, particularly younger employees. So if our employees are starting from a position of kind of looking at us with a squinty eye of, hey, I'm going to wait and watch for a while to see what I decide I really think of you or the organization, then it becomes that much more critical that we find opportunities to build trust and build a culture of trust, both with each other and with our employees. And then the last thing I just want to mention as we're wrapping up is that Infopro does have a global pool of facilitators and trainers. And these individuals are a big part of my, I'll call it brain trust. we're constantly working and consulting with these individuals on a variety of topics, again, to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening both with employees and with leaders throughout the globe. So we have a pool of over 4,000 trainers, speakers, facilitators, consultants, coaches, constantly running research studies, surveys, again, to keep ourselves at the forefront of what's really happening in the world of work. So regarding the future of leadership development, I know I've blasted a lot of information at you in the last 50 minutes or so. It's a lot to absorb. And I think for some of you, you may want to continue the conversation. This is something that I talk about frequently. And so we're going to send out just an informal link, just a Teams meeting link, not a big formal webinar, but just a meeting where we will have the audio lines open. You can join in. You can. I'd love to hear what you're doing, what you're thinking, what's working and not working within your organization. Again, this is part of just my modus operandi every single week, practically with clients. So we'll provide you with more information and schedule that for probably this same time next week. If you can join, if you want to join, fantastic. And we can talk further. And with that, Nolan, I think I'll kind of turn it back over to you to wrap things up. You've got my contact information on the screen. Happy to either individually or in next week's meeting continue the dialogue, continue discussing these issues. And it's not like there's ever going to be a single set of answers that'll be set in stone, because we're continually evolving as a workforce, as a leadership force as well. So with that, Nolan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar and sticking around. Again, we'll share this recording here in a couple days. Usually it takes to get out. Dan mentioned he is going to have a follow-up to this webinar at the same time next week. We will send an email. Dan will send out an email just asking if you want to be on that. Let him know so that he can share the invite with you to block that time. And again, it's going to be just an open session to talk and engage with your peers. So really valuable, should be a fun exercise. Again, thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate it. Dan loves to talk on this subject. Really encourage everyone to follow Dan on LinkedIn as well. He posts some great content out there. Just search for Dan Rust and you'll see him there. Tremendous stuff. Thanks, Dan, for your time, and appreciate you always investing in educating the market. Obviously, that's near and dear to your heart by writing a book, but also by doing things like this. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. We look forward to hearing from you soon, and maybe seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.